দর্শক আপনাদের সবাইকে স্বাগতম। আজকে আমাদের অতিথি ইউরোপীয় ইউনিয়নের হেড অফ ডেলিগেশন অ্যাম্বাসেডর চার্লস হোয়াইটলি। তিনি এই দফায় অ্যাম্বাসেডর থাকার আগেও 2005 থেকে 2009 সালে বাংলাদেশে এই দূতাবাসে ঢাকা দূতাবাসে কাজ করে গেছেন এবং তার বাংলাদেশ নিয়ে আসলে কি দর্শন ভাবনা সেগুলো আমরা আজকে তার কাছ থেকে জানবো। তো শুরুতে তার কাছে যাই। অ্যাম্বাসেডর হোয়াইটলি, ওয়েলকাম টু দিস কনভারসেশন। হাউ আর ইউ?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine as well. So I would like to know at first that this is your second time in Bangladesh and you also served previously from 2005 to 2009. That was a transitional period in Bangladesh's politics, and coming back after 12 years, what are the changes you have noticed in Bangladesh?
Well, I had a very interesting time in my first posting from 2005 to 9, and I was covering trade and political relations for the European Union. And of course, as you say, it was a big time of change in Bangladesh. I think it was a time when Bangladesh's GDP was affected by lots of unrest on the streets and so on for part of that time. What I see now is a Bangladesh that has moved on tremendously in economic terms. Everyone sees that when they come to Dhaka, how Dhaka has changed, but the consistent economic growth that there's been in this country and the alleviation of poverty. Of course, there is still poverty in Bangladesh, but the alleviation of poverty has been tremendous, and you see that in the human development indicators. In terms of life expectancy, for example, I think it now stands at 74 or 75 years. In terms of child mortality, maternal mortality. So all of this development has happened, as I see it, in a very quick fashion. And we've been very proud, and as you may know, we're celebrating our 50 years of relations with Bangladesh this year. I'm very proud that the EU has been a very steadfast partner of Bangladesh for those 50 years. And we've been a development partner, but also a trade partner. And we are very happy to see Bangladesh succeed and Bangladesh graduate to developing country status. And I'm very excited as to what the future holds for Bangladesh. And I think our partnership is evolving very quickly now, EU-Bangladesh relations. In my second time here as ambassador, particularly in the trade field. But there are also many issues on the table, political issues and climate change, global issues. It's a very rich relationship now. And I think that's very important that we all move with the times. Bangladesh is changing, the European Union is changing, and we need that change to work for both sides.
As you mentioned as well, that Bangladesh has a very good trade and business relationship with EU. Have you found out the other areas apart from the RMG sector where Bangladesh can find a market over there in EU, and the other areas where EU can invest in Bangladesh?
I mean, I think first of all, it's important to acknowledge the success story, and the success story is ready-made garments. I mean, it's tremendous how exports continue to grow to the EU market. We're the largest destination for Bangladesh's exports, 24 billion last year, which was a growth actually of 50% in very difficult circumstances. We have the Russian aggression in Ukraine, we have the COVID pandemic, and yet because of Bangladesh's energy and industrial output, we've seen those exports grow, but they are very concentrated. So 90% of exports to the EU are ready-made garments. So as you say, it's very important to find other success stories that can emulate the success of garments. And my point would be we very much want to see the success of garments continue. I think that industry is evolving. It's becoming more compliant in all sorts of ways. We all know the success story of the LEED certified factories that are environmentally compliant. We're working together with Bangladesh to support Bangladesh's attempts to improve labour standards. All of that is really good news for the European market because consumers pay attention to these things. But it is absolutely key that there is diversification of products that go to the EU and other markets. And we are trying to support that. One difference to when I was here in 2005 to 9 is we used to spend a lot of money on trade-related technical assistance, which was an attempt to foster new areas like jute, for example, to help them export. I think now we realise that it's better to leave the private sector to innovate and to explore different market opportunities. But we certainly want to make sure our trading regime is favourable, and that means now we have duty-free, quota-free access for everything to the EU market. And when there's a smooth transition to GSP+, which we all hope will be the case, that will remain a very similar picture. So there's nothing stopping different products getting to the EU market. What needs to happen is, for example, a better climate for foreign direct investment to support new sectors that are emerging, whether that's IT or ceramics, for example, I think there's a lot of potential in some traditional industries like jute and ceramics, in emerging industrial powerhouses like pharmaceuticals, and in the future kind of service sector like IT. So in all of these areas, Bangladesh has advantages, has an increasingly well-educated workforce, a youthful workforce, and we want that to be part of the continuing success story. So, you know, you name it, bicycles, I think also the manufacturing side of things. You know, we hear about the move towards manufacturing high-end consumer goods, cars and so on in Bangladesh. That's all good news because they can be exported also to the EU markets. And I think we'll see a huge transformation in the Bangladesh economy in the next 10, 20 years as Bangladesh moves towards being a developed country with the target date of 2041.
So in an event you mentioned that EU is not going to extend the GSP facility after 2029, but from the Bangladesh side, the businessmen want it to continue for the next 12 years. And recently the foreign minister, Dr. A.K. Abdul Momen, also said that taking away the GSP facility after graduating LDC would be like a punishment for Bangladesh. So do you have any, do you want to rethink the process? I mean, do you want to continue till 12 years from now on?
Well, we want a stable transition. We don't want any shocks to Bangladesh's economy or to the EU economy, and we rely very heavily on Bangladesh garments, as I've said, so we don't want anything to disrupt that. But the pathway that's the most appropriate, as I see now and as my headquarters sees, as Brussels sees, is the pathway to GSP+. So, and the conditions for GSP Plus are very clear. You know, it means signing, ratifying and implementing 32 international conventions. And they range across many fields, you know, from environment to human rights, labor rights, corruption. And Bangladesh, as you know, has already ratified all those instruments. So then the question arises of implementation. And we're still 6 years away. As you said, we've extended the duty-free, quota-free access with no conditions until 2029. We view that as a suitable time frame to ensure there are no shocks to the system. So I'd like the focus to be on making a success of GSP+. I think further transition time, further 3 years and so on to 2032, at the moment we don't see that as the most appropriate pathway. We believe GSP+ offers many benefits that will support Bangladesh also in diversifying its economy, so which, as we've discussed, is an important point.
Recently, in an event of Soft Expo, you talked about the upcoming brain gap that EU is going to face. You wanted Bangladeshi ICT experts to come and find jobs in Europe, different countries of Europe. So, how is EU going to recruit them as professionals, as ICT professionals or IT professionals in EU?
I mean, first of all, I think it's important to say migration is a complex issue. So, of course, you have illegal migration, but you also have legal migration. And a lot of our focus in recent years has been on illegal migration. So, Bangladeshis who take risks to go to Europe, you know, they go via Libya and other pathways. Some have drowned in the oceans, the Mediterranean, trying to get to Europe. And neither Bangladesh nor the European Union wants to encourage that kind of movement of people because it's dangerous and not helpful. So we want to, while we discourage illegal migration, we want to build up legal opportunities because, as I said, Bangladesh has this skilled, youthful workforce. You know, you see universities opening up all around in Bangladesh. So this is all a very good sign of a maturing economy and an educational system that's maturing. And we want to make sure the door is open to talented Bangladeshis through the talent partnership that we're working on with the government, have a pathway to Europe, but a very clear pathway, and that is going to Europe for a few years, but then coming back to Bangladesh so that they don't, it's not a brain drain, it's not taking talented people from Bangladesh that you need for your own economy, but it's bringing their talent and experience temporarily to Europe where they gain more experience and become more marketable maybe in Bangladesh and the world. And that very much, as you say, includes the IT sector because this is, I think it's a really growing sector in Bangladesh. You see the success that India's had, for example, the growing success there. And we need, as you said, we have a brain gap in Europe. In key sectors like the health industry, there's a brain gap. And we need to fill those positions, also because we have an aging population. You know, it really is striking how the demography of Europe has changed. And there's a lot more old people, which is a good thing because it means they're living longer. But old people need particular services as well. You know, they need care and attention. And at the moment, we don't have the young people who can ensure all those services are delivered. So I think this is something that's an advantage to Bangladesh and to Europe, and I hope we can get this working quite soon. All the departments here in Bangladesh we've talked to are very interested. We had a high-level visit from Brussels to discuss the details, and we really hope to take this forward.
Coming into the political issues, I mean, you have met the BNP leaders recently, and you have met them last year as well, and had a very lengthy discussion with them. And apart from that, you also met Jatiyo Party leaders and Bangladesh Awami League leaders. So what are the sort of discussions you are having with them? My first question. And my second question is, what is EU's current position regarding sending the observer in the next elections, national elections?
The first thing I would say is, as foreign representatives, we can't just sit in our office, you know, working on our emails. We're paid to come here and talk to people. And of course, the most important people in the country are the government and the politicians who decide policies for Bangladesh and who decide as opposition parties what their position on key issues of the day is. So when we meet the parties, it's to discuss and understand their position on the challenges that are facing Bangladesh, their vision for Bangladesh's future. Of course, the immediate elections that are coming. We need to understand how those elections are looking from the perspective of the political parties. And you know, Bangladesh has a plurality of parties, so we talk to all of them, and I think that's a healthy thing, and certainly a thing that any diplomat in any station would do. So in terms of the election observation mission, our High Representative has said that Bangladesh is a priority for election observation in 2023. We send observation missions to 12 or more countries every year, to partner countries who we have, you know, agreements with, bilateral agreements, relationships with on all sorts of levels. And so now we have to prepare for that observation mission, and the government, we're very pleased and grateful that the government has given a green light to the idea of international observation of this election, because any election should be scrutinised. And when we have elections in Europe, we have the OSCE that observes European elections, because all the elections can be improved, whether they take place in any country. So, and that's the whole ethos of the EU observation mission. An observation mission goes to a country and follows the process in quite a long-term way, and then makes recommendations that the authorities might find helpful for future elections. So it's a very constructive process, and based, of course, on international standards. So it's not invented EU standards, it's international standards for observation and for elections.
We have seen the last few elections, EU has not sent their observers, but why this time they are so attentive about this election?
Well, we last observed in 2008, as you know. We sent a large mission of 140 observers to that election, and we also funded with the UNDP the preparation of the voters list for that election. I think we can't send an election mission every year to the same country. That would be a rather strange exercise because, as I said, we only do 12 observations around the world every year. And there are, of course, many countries which welcome our observation missions because it's a way of showing openness and a readiness to engage. So that's the main reason. You know, we wouldn't come to every election, but this year there are the resources available. Last time in 2018 there weren't sufficient resources to send an observation mission. So with the agreement of the government and the Election Commission, we'd be very ready to deploy a sizable observation mission this time.
Coming to the Rohingya issue, where EU extends a great amount of their support towards the Rohingya crisis, but recently we have seen that joint response plan has not actually done well, and the international community has failed to actually provide their committed amount of money towards the Rohingya crisis. And how can they actually mitigate this crisis and actually pay their committed amount of money in managing this crisis, do you think?
Well, I think first of all, I'm pleased the EU has delivered on its commitments. We've delivered 300 million euros in the last 5 years since the crisis began, mainly through humanitarian channels. But I really find it disturbing and worrying that the international community as a whole is not paying sufficient attention to this crisis. It's important that everybody pays attention to this, including in countries that are a bit closer to Bangladesh than we are, and to countries who you might expect would want to support fellow Muslims who are suffering. So I think there's scope for others in the international community to raise their game and to say, look, we are behind you, Bangladesh, not just with words, because it's easy to speak of support. What Bangladesh needs now is hard support to feed the refugees, first of all, because there's now a cut in rations, as you know, for the Rohingya. And the Rohingya, the number is increasing, as we all know, because, of course, babies are born every year. And the government of Bangladesh has done so many things to try to make the lives of the Rohingya, bearable before they go home. We all agree they have to go home, but you need money to support these activities. And as the Joint Response Plan, as you say, is a very good document that was agreed with the Bangladesh government by the UN, which foresees livelihood support, because nobody wants the Rohingya sitting around without anything to do every day. So let's support their skill learnings that will be applicable, and they can use these skills when they go back to Myanmar. Education, but of course food is the essential, and the World Food Programme is doing its utmost to keep the refugees fed in support of the Bangladesh government, but other people need to do more. And I think it's not hard to, if you look at the regular donors to this crisis, bearing in mind there are other crises on our doorstep, the Turkish earthquake, the Russian aggression in Ukraine, which has created a huge refugee crisis in Europe, and all our member states are housing and feeding and supporting the Ukrainian refugees. We need other countries that don't have such crises and who haven't contributed very much to start finding the money for this. And I know Bangladesh has encouraged that in all its contacts around the world, and we support the government in their efforts to diversify the funding that's coming to the refugees. It's in everybody's interest, I think.
As you say, the numbers are increasing, and it is becoming day by day difficult for Bangladesh to actually hold that number of Rohingya refugees in this country. At the same time, the international fundings are coming down. So at this moment, what is the international community, including EU, thinking to find a tangible action and to find a solution of this crisis?
Well, first of all, we are keeping our funding level up in spite of the pressures from other crises. So we're doing what we can on the funding front, but we're also trying to do what we can on the political front. And we all know that the regime in Myanmar is not respecting human rights, quite the opposite. The situation is terrible, not just for Rohingya, but for many, many other groups in Myanmar. We've got sanctions on Myanmar. We introduced more sanctions in February, targeting further individuals. Sanctions, are one tool. We've suspended our development assistance to Myanmar, not our humanitarian assistance, because that goes to the poorest in need. But that sends a signal. And we run the resolutions in the UN General Assembly on Myanmar, which some people say, well, that's just a piece of paper, but it's one way of keeping international attention on the situation. And of course, the UK was instrumental in the UN Security Council resolution, which is the first time such a resolution has actually been, has got through the UN Security Council. But again, you have to ask the question, who are those in the international community who could be doing more, who aren't doing what they could be doing? To put it in that way. I think it's clear the EU is doing what it can do. There's not much more I can think of that we can do, to influence the Myanmar junta, because they are bent on their current path, and they are treating many groups with violating their human rights. There's not much more we can do. We're acting on the international stage, we're providing funding, we are putting pressure through sanctions, we've got an arms embargo on Myanmar, so we don't export any sensitive equipment whatsoever to that country. And again, there are others who are not putting pressure on. So I'm comfortable with what we're doing. I think other countries, not to name names, other countries should be doing a bit of soul searching about how they could do more to support Bangladesh and move mines in Myanmar.
So do you think that the Russia-Ukraine war has actually diverted the attention of the international community from this crisis, and actually they are more interested about the Russia-Ukraine war other than this Rohingya crisis or other crises of other parts of the world?
Well, I think it's perfectly legitimate for people to be focused also on the Ukraine war. The Russian aggression in Ukraine is the biggest existential threat we've had in Europe for a generation. So I don't think the two should compete for attention. They both should get full attention. But you have to bear in mind that we're seeing thousands of innocent civilians killed in Ukraine. We're seeing a huge refugee crisis, and that's costly, and it's costly in human terms, but also in financial terms. And The great thing is there will be an easy solution to the Ukrainian crisis, and that would be Russia respecting international law and removing itself from the territory it's occupied and respecting Ukraine as a sovereign state in line with many UN resolutions. There's an easy solution. The Rohingya crisis, I would love to say there's an easy solution, but we need to really see change on the Myanmar side, and then we can see the voluntary, safe and dignified return of the refugees. And they want to go back. In every opinion survey that is done in the camps, they want to go back to their homeland. So it should be solvable, but at present, because of the governments in Myanmar, it's not solvable.
My last question to you is a bit from the cultural aspect, that you have recently praised the movies that are made in Bangladesh. What are the movies that you have seen that recently produced by the Bangladeshi filmmakers, and how do you find them?
Well, I've seen Poran recently and Hawa, so two very good movies, two very different movies. And I think Bangladesh movie making is very imaginative. You know, it's can be quite intriguing and quite strange and challenges perceptions. So I think it's got a great future. And certainly those two movies were ones that were intriguing and quite offbeat, you know, quite unusual in their themes. So I think I hope the world, and I think the world is waking up to Bangladesh as a centre of very interesting art. I mean, we had the Dhaka Art Summit. I visited that, and the EU gave a small amount of funding to support the Dhaka Art Summit. And when you went there, I mean, you could have been in any, high-level top art capital in the world. The diversity of the art, but a lot of it, of course, homegrown. And what I loved was that Bangladeshi artists were really showcasing different aspects of work, you know, installations, traditional painting, films. It was really a great cross-section of artwork. So I think the world is waking up to Bangladesh as an art centre, and I hope that will grow, and I hope that the connections in art terms and people-to-people terms will flourish between the EU and Bangladesh, because this is our 50th anniversary. It's a special time for us, and I think the people-to-people connections are vital to make that a living thing.
So there are possibilities of great European filmmakers or artists coming to Bangladesh and collaborating with our generation of artists and new filmmakers. Is there any possibility of that?
I definitely think so, and I think people, because of the fact that lights are, in Cannes, attention was given to Bangladesh filmmaking, people see this and it's not, Bangladesh isn't so well known. There's a kind of very old-fashioned view of Bangladesh. People think of flooding and whatever, but now the world is waking up to a new Bangladesh and an exciting Bangladesh, both because of your youth, but also because of your breakneck speed in development, your voice in international affairs, but also your culture. And I think that's a really heartening thing. And I hope that Europe will, our creative forces will get together with Bangladeshi creative forces. And we try to encourage that. I'm in constant contact with the Bangladesh ambassador in Brussels, Ambassador Mahbub. He's bringing Bangladesh artwork now to Brussels to celebrate Bangladesh art for the 50th anniversary. And these kind of things really bring momentum. So I think there's everything to hope for in terms of the cultural relations in the future.
Ambassador Charles, thank you for talking to us. It was a very pleasant conversation, and thanks for your time as well. দর্শক, এতক্ষণ আমরা কথা বলছিলাম ইউরোপীয় ইউনিয়নের হেড অফ ডেলিগেশন অ্যাম্বাসেডর চার্লস হোয়াইটলির সঙ্গে। তিনি আমাদের সঙ্গে কথা বললেন পৃথিবীর দুই প্রান্তের ব্যবসা বাণিজ্য, রাজনীতি, এমনকি সংস্কৃতি নিয়েও, এবং তার আশাবাদ যে বাংলাদেশের সঙ্গে ইউরোপীয় ইউনিয়নের সম্পর্ক, মানুষের সম্পর্ক এবং সরকারের মধ্যে যে সম্পর্ক, সেটি কিন্তু আরও জোরদার হবে, আরও বৃদ্ধি পাবে, এমনটি তিনি আশা করেন। এবং তিনি চান যে বাংলাদেশের যে সংস্কৃতি সেটি তার দেশে প্রসার পাক, বাংলাদেশের সঙ্গে বাণিজ্যিক সম্পর্ক বৃদ্ধি হোক, এবং বাংলাদেশের রাজনীতিতেও ইউরোপীয় ইউনিয়ন একটি বন্ধু হিসেবে যাতে কাজ করতে পারে, তিনি সেটি আশাবাদ ব্যক্ত করেন। এতক্ষণ আমাদের সঙ্গে থাকার জন্য আপনাদের সবাইকে অসংখ্য ধন্যবাদ।